Good morning. It's May 1st, and this is to my liberal friends. Well, Joe Biden promised to be the best union president in history. He went to Michigan and walked in a labor dispute line to show his solidarity with union workers. He was in lockstep with union leaders on just about every issue. He did this because Democrats were counting on the votes of union members to deliver key states to them last November. When states like Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania went to Trump, it must have been a hard pill to swallow for many Democrats. I grew up in a union city. Pittsburgh was as strong a union bastion as any place in the country. Every summer I worked in one of the steel mills and was forced to join the union, even though I was only there for 3 months. I want to caveat my comments today by stating that the men I worked with were some of the finest, hard-working men I've ever known. They were the backbone of this country. They were fiercely patriotic, and most of them wanted nothing more than a chance to make a life for their children that was better than their own. And unions are not a bad thing, but like anything in life, the pendulum can swing back and forth. Generations ago, the workers of this country were abused and working conditions were abhorrent. The owners of the plants and factories held all the economic cards and enforced the workers to unite, and in the end formed unions. My paternal grandfather came to the United States from Scotland and was a coal miner. He helped John L. Lewis organize the United Mine Workers. Duncan Hatta was a union man through and through. But over time, the unions flexed their power, and at times they became as bad as the owners. On one summer job, I was working on a coke wharf at the U.S. Steel plant in Clairton. On the midnight shift, I noticed there were several light bulbs out. So I did what any reasonable person would do, and I changed them so as not to have dark spots on the work platform. I was sent home with a reprimand for doing that task. You see, that was an electrician's job, and the electricians only worked the day shift. I was supposed to work in the dark, I guess. On another summer job at J&L Steel on the south side of Pittsburgh, the union called for a wildcat strike. The two issues were fundamental to them. Remember, this is in the 1960s. During World War II, the mills had introduced incentive pay to increase production. The open hearth department where I was working was getting 46% incentive pay. It had been locked in. The other departments had seen their incentive pay reduced over time to 19%. The company wanted to reduce the open hearth department to 19%. That was unacceptable to the workers. The second issue, and the one that I think drove the strike, was amusing. The workers were getting 2 checks. They got their regular wages check and a second check for their incentive pay. The company wanted to give them a single check with the 2 payments listed on the pay stub. The problem was that many of the workers kept the second check and gave the primary one to their wives. The second one, as they used to put it, was their drinking money. They stayed out 2 weeks, but eventually they had to give it on both issues. Over time, the Steelworkers Union has driven the American steel industry out of business, and only a few steel mills remain. Today, in my opinion, unions don't work in the interest of anything but what the union bosses want. They would rather shut down a company than give in. I have a good friend here where I live who owned a flooring company in the Seattle area. He was one of the largest in the region and did most of the commercial jobs in the area. His employees were unionized. When the contract was about to expire, the union brought their demands to him. After 2 weeks of negotiations, he told me they would not budge and their demands would make him non-competitive in the marketplace. He also told me he had about 150 employees. He told them he could not meet their demands and he would have to close the business and simply retire. The union negotiators, they didn't believe him and held firm. This man then announced he was closing the company. He told me about 30 of his workers found jobs at other companies, all non-union, but the rest were left unemployed. I think we all saw how the teachers' unions approached the COVID pandemic. They were interested in the welfare of the students? No, I don't think so. And led by union leaders like Randy Weingarten, they insisted the schools be shut down and resisted reopening them. After all, since they were public employees, they're still getting paid this way and could sit at home. My daughter was one of those teachers, and she wanted desperately to go back to the classroom. I think a lot of individual teachers felt like she did, but the union leaders had control. The result was millions of students are now far behind where they should be in their education, and the test scores bear this out. And we're seeing this play sort of reenacted once again at United Parcel Service. They announced this week they're laying off 20,000 workers and closing 73 of their facilities. This is on top of 12,000 jobs cut last year. The reasons are falling package volumes and rising labor costs from the 2023 contract demanded by the Teamsters. When you see that UPS truck in your neighborhood, understand the average compensation for the driver is going to be about $170,000, and he gets up to 7 weeks of paid vacation. In addition, their health care premiums are paid fully by the company. I get it that unions have to represent the workers and get the best deal possible. But they also have to understand and acknowledge that those demands could ultimately mean that the workers they're representing could lose their jobs. But guess who keeps their jobs? The leaders of the union. The working man loses his paycheck, but Sean O'Brien, the Teamsters boss, will keep his $400,000 plus job and all the perks that go with it. And within the union bureaucracy at the Teamsters, there are about 160 people who are making more than $200,000 a year. Not bad for negotiating a contract that costs thousands of jobs. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.